Hi, my name's Walter Montero. I'm a real estate and mortgage agent here in Cambridge, Ontario, and I've had the privilege of serving our community since 1987. Over the years, I've met some great people here in our community in many different businesses and walks of life. Some, of course, are well known, and others are some of the best kept secrets in town. So the purpose of this podcast is to share and introduce them to you. Welcome to the I Love Cambridge podcast. Hey, good afternoon. I'm about to interview a chap by the name of Wayne Paddick. He's the executive director of the Cambridge Homeless Shelter, otherwise known as the Bridges. We're going to ask him some real candid questions, and I'm sure it's going to be a lot of some fun, of course, by all means. But we're talking about a very serious situation here. Obviously, we know the Cambridge situation with homelessness has really escalated. And we want to get a little bit to the heart of the matter of what's going on down at the Bridges and just find out a little bit about the people that come in and out of there. Okay, so stand by. You're about to meet Wayne, and we'll. Hey, thanks so much for.
No problem.
This is great. You've been on my radar for a bit, so I've wanted to talk to you.
Yeah, good.
Just get down to the heart of the matter of what's happening down at. You guys still call it the Bridges?
We do. Yeah, it is the Bridges. Cambridge Shelter Corporation is the official term, but yeah, nicknamed the Bridges, sure.
Okay. All right. So tell us what's going on down there. What can you provide us with current situations and how things are playing out down there?
So beginning of the pandemic, prior to February of 2019, we had in our building probably about 120, 125 people a night. The shelter was built for 50 individuals, so as you can imagine, quite packed.
Wow.
Introduced COVID, we pared down our numbers to about 85 as a maximum. We actually distanced out the beds in our dorm space 6 feet apart so that we could, comply with health standards. So that made led us to lose about 40 beds in the shelter. Okay. What we did then is we were able to add space through some local motel programs and through some other agencies to allow us to never turn anybody away at the door. Currently, we're sitting any given night about 60 to 65 individuals in our shelter. So still lots of beds, so we're doing our part to help with the whole encampment issue by being able to free up some of that space. So during COVID, we've been able to house 240 individuals now through our crack housing team in the building. And we've just started a new external housing team, going to be working through a program called Scattered Site Supportive Housing, which will provide wraparound supports for those individuals that we're able to house.
I see. Okay. So I actually had some of those questions lined out here. So the current capacity right now is at about 85. You guys are dealing with about 60 to 65 a night.
Correct.
And I would assume that's probably because the weather's a little better.
It is. Yeah. Well, and you know what? Even during the winter, we never hit capacity.
Oh, and never hit. Okay.
Yeah, that's the first winter that we haven't. And I don't know, a lot of folks did choose to ride out the winter outdoors. Okay. We did have some motel space, but even that wasn't full. So your guess is as good as mine as to why we're never hitting capacity, but we do have space. Yes.
Okay. And how many? What's the overflow? How many beds or how many rooms, I guess, or whatever would be support in the overflow side?
So during the winter time, the region provides funding for us to get 20 rooms at local motels. So up to 40 individuals. So that program, we shut that down end of April. And the last couple of years, we've been able to house most individuals that we put up at the motel. We typically put our lower acuity individuals up there. So our fellows who are working, who are fairly mentally stable, our non-substance users, so that we can rapidly house them as opposed to bringing them back to shelter. So we've been very successful with that the last couple of years, which means that we leave our higher acuity individuals here at the shelter.
Gotcha. Okay. So now let me ask you a question, because some of these, it's funny. I reached out to a few people with regards to our interview, and I said, "Hey, I'm interviewing Wayne from the homeless shelter. What kind of questions would you want me to ask?" So I'm going to ask you
Yep.
maybe some hardcore. Probably you're an old pro, so you could handle these.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
let me ask you a question. These people that you're, I guess you refer to them as clients, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. How many of them would we deem local, and how many are coming from outside areas?
So the way that our shelter system is funded, we only fund shelter beds for people from our region.
Okay.
So they're all local.
Okay.
There's misconceptions out there and rumors out there that there's busloads of people being transported from other cities. We get that a lot.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen, right?
Okay.
So I'm not sure where that gets started, or if it's a tongue-in-cheek, somebody saying in tongue-in-cheek and it gets taken seriously. But I've heard that from London, I've heard that from Toronto, that they're receiving busloads of individuals, and it's simply not true in this region, right? We have yet to receive a busload of out-of-towners from other regions. In fact, I've worked with individuals in my previous role as a street nurse who were not able to access shelter simply because they're not from the region. So they get diverted back to their home region where they can access shelters there.
Okay. And of course, the verification of this is done through what? Through identification?
Through identification. And again, most people are honest, or we have ways of finding out with help from our police friends, or, just background checks through, various sources. Again, most people come through the door are honest about where they're from. If they have identification, we ask for it. We keep copies of it here in case they lose it, that we can we have an ID clinic here that will help folks kind of get their ID back if they lose it. So most of the time when people come through the door, we know who they are, or they're honest about where they're coming from, and it helps us kind of keep that trail straight.
Okay, good. Now, what would you say are some of the misconceptions people have of bridges, or even the clients that come through bridges?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions about folks who are experiencing homelessness is they're all choosing to be homeless. They're choosing to live in an encampment. They're making lifestyle choices. And I always say that I've never met an individual who one day woke up and said, I'm going to be a homeless substance user today. And that lifestyle begins. So when we look at the reasons why people are here, a lot of times it's trauma. They've had a traumatic incident in their life. They've lost their job. They've become addicted to Percocet medication and go down that rabbit hole of addiction. Some of the stories I have of guys who were, living the all-American lifestyle of the house, the wife, the kids, the cottage. Life happens, car accident, workplace accident, brain injury happens, mental health happens, and all of a sudden, one thing leads to another, and they find themselves in a homeless shelter. So, that's one big misconception that we hear, is that, the people are choosing this lifestyle, and that's simply not true. I think most of them would choose a roof over their head as opposed to being, homeless or on the streets or in an encampment or a shelter. So
sure.
I think one of the other misconceptions as well is that everybody who's either homeless or staying in shelter is a substance user. Yeah. Our largest growing demographic right now is our older adults. We're sitting at about 40% of our individuals are 55 and over. Wow. And there's not many of them that use substances. So, it's not uncommon to have a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old individual dropped off on our doorstep by family or through other social services because they've simply, due to the housing crisis, simply lost their ability to support themselves in a living environment. So it's truly sad when we see these individuals come through. And beginning of the pandemic, we had an older couple who'd lost their apartment. She was a retired nurse. He was a retired business owner. He became unwell. They could no longer afford their rent on their pensions, and they landed in shelter. So those stories are becoming more common, as opposed to the visual that we see, which is the minority. The folks outside the fence line, the folks in encampments. Most of the folks in the shelter are wanting to be housed. They're wanting to get back to work. A lot of them, they're wanting to make changes in their lifestyle. Gotcha.
Okay. Now let me ask you something about the shelter itself.
Yep.
Again, these are again questions that come at me. The appearance of the outside right now.
Yep.
Obviously, it's pretty evident. It's in pretty rough shape on the outside. Why is that? What can we do to help with that? or even prevent it for that matter, if possible.
So this is another misconception, and I'm equally frustrated. I'm just as frustrated as the community, because the what's happening outside our fence line is not a result of the bridges, right? We have, like, the folks out there are either trespass individuals for various reasons. They're a safety risk to staff, which is why I don't allow my staff to go out there to deal with them or to attempt to clean up, because they're out there because they're a safety risk.
Yeah.
But what we do is we call the city, we call bylaw, and we try to work with police to move these individuals along, because again, we get, the fingers are pointed at us, and they're saying this is your issue because it's outside our fence line, when in fact it's a city and it's a region issue. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm as equally frustrated that every morning I come in, and I know who most of the individuals are out there, and for whatever reason, they're not wanting to go to the women's shelter in Kitchener. They're not wanting to, go to the men's shelter alternatives in Kitchener, and they just decide that camping outside our fence line and hanging their clothes up and creating this garage sale effect is okay, when they don't really see the impact that it's having on the business and on the folks who are really trying to make change, right? And everybody gets kind of painted with that same brush.
Gotcha. Okay. So now, with regards to, obviously involving the police and that sort of thing, there's always seems to be, I shouldn't say always, it just seems to be quite a police presence in that area. Mm-hmm. Is that because of moving these people along, or are there other issues inside the shelter that people should be aware of?
I think there's a bit of both. I think there's obviously, like, what I'm noticing lately is our bike patrol. Yeah. Officers are making more frequent stops to the folks in front, probably trying to develop a rapport with them, trying to engage with them so that they can have a better relationship when it comes time to move them along. Yeah. A lot of times as well, we are calling police to our property simply because some of our individuals who are not guests here will access the building, right? And we can't monitor every single entrance at every single minute. So when they access and refuse to leave, a lot of times we have to resort to, like any business would, calling the police to have them removed. So most of the time, the police are here in peaceful ways. They're here to assist us with keeping our space safe for staff and those who are trying to move forward. But yeah, unfortunately, we do have a very good relationship with our South Division. Yeah. It's just trying to get them out peacefully sometimes by ourselves doesn't work.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, what about volunteers? The people that help down there. How many are down there? What kind of hours are these people putting in? Yeah. To what capacity are they helping? That sort of thing.
So that number really decreased. In fact, went down to 0 during the pandemic, right? Obviously, we couldn't have volunteers in. We've had our share of outbreaks. You can imagine our population not are the best with complying with PPE standards or hand washing techniques. So we have ramped back up, I would say, in the last year. I believe our volunteer coordinator has anywhere between 250 to 300 volunteers on staff. We're always trying to find new ways to engage our volunteers. So the primary way is we have volunteers helping out in our kitchen. So every night we provide a hot meal for our residents. Volunteers either through an entire church group coming in, or we have families coming in to help, or just individual volunteers get scheduled to ensure that there's enough hands on deck to prepare the meals, to serve the meals, to clean up before and after the meals. The one area that I'm pleasantly surprised that we've seen an increase in is our high school students. I've been trying to get out to speak to as many high school classes, social studies classes, talk about the work that we're doing at Bridges and this issue of homelessness that our teenagers are hearing, and developing their own opinions on. But at the end of a lot of those talks, I've had students ask me, what can we do to help? Right. So obviously they're not, most of them aren't in a financial position to be able to make donations or to get involved fiscally or financially. So I say, come down and volunteer. You need volunteer hours, right? Come down. And what I have found, and my kids included, is that once they come and experience and break bread with some of our residents and realize that everything they're seeing in the media is not all true, they enjoy that and they can't wait to come back. My kids have been dozens of times and they just love coming down. They ask how certain individuals are doing. When they come down, they can play cards or just engage with the participants, and they do. The high school kids are really enjoying their experience, and I'm hoping that it leads to some nursing careers or some social service careers. So yeah,
sure, okay. So now, when somebody shows up at the bridges, the client shows up at the bridges, what's the typical onboarding process?
Yep.
How do you assess that this is a legitimate client?
Yep.
And even dealing with mental capacities and that sort of thing.
So we have intakes at the shelter. So we have our night team that starts at 8 o'clock, and we start doing intakes at 8 o'clock. So let's say Walter shows up at the door. We don't know who Walter is. The first phone call we make is to an agency called First Connect. So First Connect used to be called Prevention and Diversion, and they're the agency that kind of helps all the shelters in the region navigate new admissions. So if Walter comes in, we call First Connect. They can say, yep, Walter is his last known residence was in Cambridge. He's good to access the space. Great. We proceed with an intake process.
Okay.
They can also let the shelter know that, Walter had an incident. He was trespassed. He's still under current trespass. We can send him up to Kitchener where he's not trespassed. So this First Connect agency is really helpful in assisting our staff keep the system streamlined when new individuals come in. If they're individuals that we know, it's a very quick process of, Wayne, you're coming back. Great. Yep. You're assigned to bed 42 and away you go. But for those folks that we don't know a little bit more in depth, our intake process will check in with things like, are you an active substance user? If so, are you looking for supports? What is your drug of choice? How do you use mental health as well? Like we're very open with mental health. I'm a mental health nurse by trade, so I've kind of schooled our staff to be able to ask some of those questions in compassionate ways, right? Medications is another part of intake where we will we take individuals' medications for them and we store them so that they're not stolen or lost, and then we do our best to cue them when it's time to take their medications or remind them that they need to take their medications. So the intake process as well with the ID piece that we talked about before. If somebody doesn't have ID, then we have an ID clinic that we would get them connected with, get that ball rolling. Within 72 hours, usually a lot quicker, but that's kind of our goal, is they meet with a housing worker upon intake, and our housing team will seek out the new individuals, introduce themselves, and they go down, they start that path of housing individuals. So again, we recognize that some individuals need identification, some haven't done their taxes in years, so that's a barrier. So we get those done. We have 2 staff that are trained in doing tax returns, so we can get those done for folks. And then, finding out, what kind of accommodation they're looking for, getting them on any housing lists, completing any assessments that they need to be done in regards to the regional housing list or the subsidized housing list, the supportive housing list and all that. And then, really put a wraparound plan together, case management plan for them.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when I was looking at your site, I noticed quite a sort of a menu of ancillary services that you offer, which you're obviously mentioning there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The other thing that we should mention too, along with that, is a lot of our individuals, aren't very good at managing their money, right? I'm guilty, right? That's why I have a wife. She helps me manage, We have what's called a voluntary trust program. We've all heard of PG&T or public guardian and trustee, who are sometimes appointed by the courts or by health services when individuals aren't capable of managing their own finances. But we've been running a voluntary trust program since the shelter opened. And what individuals can do is they can sign up, and Melissa, who's our trust coordinator, trust manager, she'll help them manage their money so that they can save for first and last month's rent. They can, if they're housed, so once people are housed, they can stay in the program. Melissa makes sure that their rent is paid, that they have enough money for groceries every week. So really taking their money and helping our individuals manage that money. So that's a very important piece of getting an individual housed and then making sure that they stay housed.
That's awesome. So it's almost like a money coach.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
awesome. Very good. Now, what about safety? People stay in there, clients stay in there. I mean, I don't necessarily know about the Cambridge shelter, but you hear stories about people being afraid of going into these
Yep.
types of environments. What is done in the Cambridge shelter to reassure that safety parameters are in place?
Yep. So I think the first thing is we have a very robust training program for new staff around, de-escalation, around crisis management, around a lot of that stuff, right? So we do our best, and they do a very good job of intervening when there is an altercation at the verbal stage. As you can imagine, especially in the wintertime or in the dead of summer, when people are kind of trapped in a small space together. I mean, tempers are going to start to rise, and individuals, you're just getting on each other. It's like, I think some of us were stuck living with spouses and kids during the pandemic, and stuff like that. It just bottles up, right? So it's a natural phenomenon that, when you're putting people in a condensed space for a long period of time, then there's going to be difference of who wants to watch what on TV, or who was first in meal line, and so our staff do a very, very good job of de-escalating of that. We also have cameras right throughout the building, except for the sleeping spaces. So anytime that there is, an assault or, a theft of an item, we're able to kind of go back and check the cameras and really be able to follow up with police if necessary, but also talk to the individuals, work with the individuals to kind of, prevent a repeat of that, right? So, just by the nature of the fact that a lot of our clients, or some of our clients, are in self-protection mode, right? They've had to fend for themselves for a long time. And
Sure.
So some of them, the only way they know how to do that is through using their fists, right?
Sure, sure.
Our staff, I don't know when, it's been years since one of our staff has been assaulted. It's been years since, somebody who was just sitting there by themselves, not engaged in an altercation, was assaulted. Typically, it's between two willing individuals who are having a disagreement, and it goes from there. So for the folks who are here, like I said, we have a lot of seniors. We have a lot of guys who go off to work every day. Typically, there's no safety risk to those guys, because they mind their own business, they stick to themselves, they have their own things that they do, and the risk is minimal. So,
gotcha. Okay. Now, so when somebody enters into the shelter, are they in for a while, or do they have to come back every night, or like, how does somebody know that they can be there or first of all, can they be there more than one night, or even a longer stretch for that matter?
So they're allowed to stay here longer than one night. So as long as they're engaged with housing, with the housing team, and they're really trying to work towards housing, then they're allowed to stay.
I see.
If they kind of disengage and are not wanting to work on housing, but have the capacity to do so. So, for example, if we have an individual who's very mentally unwell, or is not capable of having those healthy housing conversations, then they're kind of the exception, and we have a lot of those exceptions. But if they are capable and they are working and are of sound mind, then those housing discussions are expected. Or else they're given a 14-day warning that you better engage, or you have to meet with a housing worker and move forward. But as far as timelines go, the region kind of insists that we don't put those strict timelines on, because everybody's journey is a little bit different. If somebody has come into our shelter, for example, and they've lost their identification, we can't even start the housing process or get their taxes done without that identification. So we need to go, a lot of times our ID clinic, Jonathan will have to start with a birth certificate. And if you've ever applied for a birth certificate, it's a very tedious process of having to find out mothers' maiden names and a lot of stuff that our clients may not have that information. So it's quite a tedious process of pulling a lot of that information. Depending what province people are born from, it takes a lot longer for some provinces, like Alberta for some reason. So once they get their ID, then we can kind of start moving them forward. So a lot of times they're willing to move out, they want to move out, but they're stuck kind of waiting for the system to kind of, catch up with them, in whatever circumstance they're in. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, with regards to another rumor, of course, moving.
Yep.
There's been rumors that the shelter is going to be moving off of Ainsley Street.
I've heard rumors, Walter, since I started, even before I started here, that
what can you tell us about that?
You know what, and what I say to folks is right now, like, we're run by a board of directors, like all nonprofits are. It's not something that we're actively discussing. Okay. I've heard rumors that there's committees that are working on this, that there's groups that are putting together a plan. We have never been invited to any sort of table around moving. And you know what, I mean, this is our building, and we really try to work with our community partners, and we try to we have what's called a good neighbor policy, where, you know, if individuals are disrespecting properties around us, then they will be denied service. So we're really trying to make the best of the situation while we're here, but it doesn't mean that somewhere down the road we get an excellent offer, or, you know, somebody comes along and donates a big piece of property, or the city says, here, let's do this. And it doesn't mean we're not open to entertaining a conversation. It means right now it's not on the radar.
Okay. Very good. Now, when somebody comes in, and I mean, obviously, you being a mental health nurse, or how is there an actual formal assessment done to determine, okay, this person's in trouble? Do we have the capacity to take care of them? And if you don't, what's the next step? What happens to that individual?
Yeah. So if an individual comes in, I will definitely do kind of the first assessment. We also have, when I moved into the executive director role, we hired another mental health nurse. Okay. So between us, we will kind of do an assessment of, is this person a risk to themselves or others? If they're not, and if they're just, I mean, you're allowed to be mentally unwell. There's nothing illegal about that, right? So if they're just choosing not to take meds, or they're just choosing to, you know, to be, you know, the way they are, then we will allow them to be, but also make a referral to we have a physician that comes in every Thursday through Lang's. And so if we have somebody who's new, we would make a referral to that interprofessional care team to say, you know, Wayne just came in, he seems a little unstable, you might want to meet with them. That team over the years has been able to get a lot of folks started on mental health medication, make a lot of referrals to psychiatry and other mental health supports. We have what's called an SOS team in the community, which is a nurse and a social worker. That's the team that I was a part of before I came to the shelter, that will come in and make some of those initial mental health, you know, have some of those initial interactions with individuals to assist us with making those assessments. So there's lots of supports right now. We have here 24/7 through CMHA. We have addiction supports as well that come in. So we have lots of supports when folks come through that door, and either we identify that there's an issue here, or they identify, you know, I haven't been on my mental health meds for years, I don't know how to get them again. Great, let's go down that path and let's get you healthy again, right? Gotcha. A lot of those folks, you know, we can't even think about housing them until they're stable, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Now, so is that how you ended up at the shelter then, initially as a nurse then?
Yeah. So I started with CMHA probably 10, 11 years ago now. Okay. In Cambridge as a specialized outreach nurse. Okay. My background was mental health. I started in Guelph at the Homewood, did some stints at Grand River Hospital adult inpatient unit, the CCAC. I was there for a couple of years, and then with the CMHA for about 8 years. So it was through that work that I developed a good knowledge of the folks that we serve here, as well as their issues. And then, you know, myself and the previous executive director, Ann Tinker, had kind of spoken about the needs of the shelter goers and how, you know, we really need that mental health support, you know, at our beck and call, right? So we needed, you know, as an outside agency, I would come when I could, wasn't always able to respond maybe as quick as the shelter needed. So we thought, let's bring it internal. And that's what Ann did. She brought me in as the manager of mental health, and the work started pretty much right away.
Awesome. Yeah, very good. All right. Well, wow. That's, I mean, you certainly gave us a lot of insight here, and I certainly appreciate it. Now, is there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have, or anything that you want the community to know?
You know, I guess, you know, again, we're doing our best to work with individuals. I just ask the community for patience. You know, I know it's hard when we see the encampments and we see the social media stories with fires and axes and everything that's gone on in the last, since it's really come to the forefront during the pandemic. And, I know there's lots of good agencies out there trying to do the work with these individuals. We've opened up more spaces here. We're taking on some outreach positions as well to kind of assist with that. And I know it's a risk for the community. And I know it's frustrating at times, because the thought is that folks are getting away with stuff that you and I as law-abiding citizens couldn't, right? They are trying to do the work. So compassion, to our fellow man. They're in these situations a lot of times because of circumstances outside of their control. And I just ask that we kind of work together as a community to kind of bring an end to homelessness in Cambridge.
Awesome. Very good. Yeah, I know certainly the economy is not helping either these days.
That's right. Yeah. Well, can you imagine during the pandemic when everything closed down, Tim Hortons and McDonald's and stuff, and that's where a lot of these guys would go for water, go for a coffee, and they didn't have a car to go through the drive-through. So, a lot of they were shut out. They were, denied access to a lot of things, and through that they built up a bit of mistrust for the system and for their community. And we're really trying to. We started a new social enterprise not too long ago, and we're really trying to, through that program, reintegrate our guys back into being healthy members of the community and cutting grass and being in people's yards and really doing a positive number in Cambridge. So we're really hoping that changes the conversation about how folks view those who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, and again, looking at your website, I noticed a couple of success stories on there, and they were really heartwarming to read. That's for sure.
And you know what, Walter, I've had guys in my office just in tears, broken down. I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. And we've been able to do some really neat things with some of these guys in order to break that cycle, in order to break their addiction. And you know what, when I see them months later and I can say, wow, you're doing it. And to see them full of color, to see them healthy, we are really working hard with individuals who want to make change to make those changes. So it's really heartwarming. I love to come to work in the morning. I love when I come on property and guys say, good morning, Wayne, or good morning, boss. And at the end of the day, they say, have a good night, boss. That is really heartwarming stuff.
That's awesome. Well, Wayne, thanks so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. God bless you. And if there's anything we can do for you, by all means, just let us know.
Thanks, Walter. We'll chat soon.
Okay, you bet.
Okay, bye-bye.